In this movie, I want to talk about how color works in Illustrator and just do a basic color demo. You'll notice that I opened up a new document, and I just want to take a second to talk about color mode. When you're working in Illustrator, you want to be able to choose which color mode, very similar to Photoshop. I think the rule of thumb I would use is if you're doing any type of screen design, web graphics, or even stuff that's going to be printed to inkjet printers, RGB color is the good mode to work in. A lot of inkjet printers prefer to get their data in RGB and then convert it on the fly to their color profile. That said, if you're working and your final production is going to be to print, to offset printing, then CMYK color is the choice to use. If you're not sure, you can always err on the side of CMYK color and convert to RGB later. So anyway, I'm going to get started. The next issue with color, really, you've probably already worked with the color palette, and in the color palette here, obviously I'm in CMYK as well. You can choose from a rainbow of colors, but for precision you can really just choose a particular color, and a lot of times you'll notice CMYK defined in percentages. So you might see something like this, where they tell you the numbers based on percentages and you input the colors there. Of course you can choose the different types of color models to work with. RGB, everything is measured from 0 to 255. You basically have 256 levels of red, green, and blue. The way that this works is basically if the colors have the same amount, you're going to end up having a neutral gray. So in this case I put in 128 in all three, which is about half, so we're looking at about a 50% gray with RGB. RGB isn't the most intuitive color interface to work with, but Illustrator helps quite a bit by painting these colors on the side, so you know what kind of color you're going to get if you make, if you slide these sliders around. One of the more interesting color picks is HSB. HSB is much more like a painter would work. H stands for hue, or basically your rainbow of colors. S stands for saturation, or the intensity of the color. And then B stands for brightness, whether it's going to be a light color or it's going to be a dark color. Note a couple of things on this. As I slide towards the light side, get an exclamation point here, and that indicates that the color I'm selecting is outside the CMYK spectrum. So when it does this, it's going to, when it prints, it's going to be this color. So notice that Illustrator gives you the ability to just click to make a slight correction, and now this color's inside the CMYK spectrum. This guy means that it's outside the web spectrum, and you can see the little message said that. The web has basically 216 safe colors for all the 8-bit monitors that are out there still. So 216 rather than 256 if we want to have colors that are viewable on both Macs and PCs. This isn't as much an issue anymore as it used to be, but still, if you're trying to make something web safe, you can go ahead and choose the color from there, and it makes it even more basic. Notice that Illustrator also has this nice web safe RGB, and this is neat. You'll notice that it works in indexes, so as I slide this around I see the colors, and if you've ever input colors for the web, you'll notice that you put them in this hexadecimal system. So that's what you're seeing here. CC99 would be the hexadecimal for what this color is. Anyway, that's the color palette. What I really want to show you though is the Swatches palette, because the Swatches palette really will help you or hurt you as you're working with color. What I'm going to do is I can choose a swatch right off the bat, or I can make a new swatch. Notice that I can drag this thing around, come up with a swatch that I like, just click and drag this down to Swatches, it adds it into the swatch palette. I can double click on the swatch and I can name it. And I'll explain this stuff in just a second. But essentially I can make color swatches, and the reason you would do this is if you wanted to reuse the swatches. Now I'm going to hide, there's a number of things that can show up. You can have pattern swatches only, you can have gradient swatches only, or you can have just plain color swatches. And I'm going to show just color swatches right now for this demo. Now in this case I've made a swatch, and this is how the default basic swatch works. Not a swatch with these little triangles, just a plain basic swatch. If I click away, if I decide I want to have another color, I can choose it from these swatches, and that's all there is to it. If I decide down the road to edit this swatch and change it to something else, let's say I decide I want to make it yellow, it will only affect that swatch and any selection that happened to be there. Notice that the earlier swatch color doesn't change. So if you want a swatch that you can change and it will update in Illustrator, you need to use a different kind of swatch. That type of swatch is called a global color. If I double click on this, notice that there's this checkbox to make this global. When I choose this, now if I apply this color, I'll apply it to a couple of different shapes. Let's see here, I just want to drag out a rectangle, there we go. Alright, so I've applied it to a couple of different shapes. First of all, notice that now this swatch shows up, instead of having just kind of this standard RGB here, when you click on a global color you can choose a temp value, which is very handy. I can say, oh, I only want 50% of my color swatch, and I end up getting 50% of that tint. Now this is different than visibility or having transparency in Illustrator. This is still a solid color that sits over another object. If I move this, you'll notice it sits on top of that object. But using tints is a great way to work with a limited color set. So in this case I've got this global color. Now here's the really cool part. I can go in and edit my global color here, and maybe I decide I really want it to be green. When I say OK, everything that's using that color in the Illustrator document changes. Global color swatches are wonderful if you're doing something like cartooning, where you have some basic skin tones and you get the cartoon ready, you do maybe a color match on it right before it goes to press. If they come back and say, oh, you know what, we want you to bump up the skin tone by 10% in magenta, you can do that with a global color. Maybe I just have something that would say Caucasian skin tone. Double click on it, open it up, and bump it up. Obviously this isn't a Caucasian skin tone, but you get my meaning. I can make an adjustment here, 32, and wherever that color is used, the adjustment gets applied. So this is a really smart way to work with Illustrator so that you don't have to constantly wonder, did I get all of the color adjusted? Now, this used to be one of the only ways you could do it. Now with, if you have the magic wand, you can select colors based off of the magic wand selection. You can also select a color and choose select same, and you can choose fill color and it will find fill colors. But I still like the ability to make a global color and be able to edit that, because you'll notice that the tint also changed when I made the adjustment to the color. So consider global color swatches when you're doing your work. I think you'll find they're a lot easier to work with. Okay, the next thing about color. When we open up these color swatches, you'll notice that the color type is either process color or spot color. A process color is going to separate into these process component parts, even if it's RGB. When it's a process color, it's going to separate into CMYK. That's just really important to understand. So if you're doing an offset print job, or you're doing any type of press job rather than a digital color print or web stuff, you have to know whether your colors, the swatches you're making, are going to be process color or spot. In the example I just used, I think it would be fine to keep your skin tones process colors because you'd end up just printing it to a process printer anyway. But there are certain types of colors where you want this to be spot. And all that means is first notice that global gets checked and grayed out by default. You can't have a non-global spot color. A spot color, what that is, and notice in the swatch palette we get a little dot next to this. What that is it says, okay, when this prints, it's going to output to its own printing plate. It's not going to output to CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, black. This color plate is going to come out all on its own. And that's real critical. If I have a printer who's going to mix a color for me, especially just for me, that printer's not going to want these shapes to output onto separate little printing plates. That printer is going to want these shapes to output to one printing plate that his ink is going to be able to go on to. So a spot color is a special type of global color. Now, typically you're not going to make your own spot colors. What you're going to do is load them. And if we go under Window and we go down to Swatch Libraries, notice that I can choose a Pantone solid library. I would hopefully have a Pantone book to choose from too. And if I open this up, I can choose from a rainbow, or I can also choose by list. And this is much more handy because a lot of Pantone colors have these names. And note that you can also find a color. Let me see if I can expand this up. And if I type in, let's see if I type in 125. Oh, let's see. Oh, wouldn't you know it? I always have trouble with this. Show find field. There we go. So if I'm looking for Pantone 125, I can type it in here and it finds it for me. So this used to just always be available, and now they've kind of hidden it in here. So we just want to be able to show that find field so that you can type in a color name. Now, when I choose this color, supposedly I would have picked it out of a Pantone book with the designer. I can then apply this, or I can drag this into the palette so that I can have it available. It's odd that it's so close to the color that I had before. Let's scroll down and pick a different color just so we've got something different. Pantone 348. Okay. So if I select these colors, these boxes, and give them Pantone 348, I'll give one Pantone 348. I'll give one this other Pantone 125. Let's do a tint of 348. So I have 2 tints here, 2 spot colors, and then I have the black outline. Don't ever forget that your objects, if you have outlines, indicate another color. So this print job right now would be called a 3-color print job. And in the next movie I'm going to discuss basically how to set up your document so that you can print a spot color job or a process color job. That'll be the next movie.